Hey guys, so real quick before we go into the 2024 horoscope, after I got done recording it, I realized every time I pulled up AstroGold to look at the chart, my voice ended up having this really crazy echo delay. So I had Parker go ahead and fix that. However, the way to fix that was to give me a kind of a weird voice. So if in certain parts of this video, or if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple, my voice sounds weird, that is just a fix. Don't worry about it. And it sounds a lot better than if you were going to hear me echo and delay and all that stuff. So anyway, enjoy the video. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2024 year ahead horoscope / year ahead overview. My name is Cam White, if you don't know me already. And typically what I like to do is go over all of the year ahead's major transits just in general before I post the year ahead horoscopes. But anyway, today we're going to be talking about 2024. We have a lot to talk about. It's not, I know I always say this, it's not the biggest year. However, there's quite a bit of transits that are quite a big deal to talk about. But the real big year is going to be 2025. And I like to look at 2024 as a build up to 2025. Like 2020 was like a gigantic switch. 2021 was kind of like, okay, now we're in this phase. Now we're in this chapter. 2022 was like reckoning with that change. 2023 was kind of like a slow down to like a pivot. 2024 is a ramp up, and then 2025 is when we see a lot of major transits, or a lot of major changes, I should say. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So how this video is going to work is we're going to first just go over the highlights of 2024. What are the major transits? What are the major events? When are they happening? So we can kind of just get an idea of what we're looking at. Then we're going to go month by month, really only looking at the major transits of month by month. So like I'm not going to be talking about every new moon and full moon, for example. And after this, I want you to watch your rising sign horoscope / your sun sign horoscope. I like to post this first so everyone kind of gets an idea of what the year looks like ahead. But then once you're done watching this, go ahead and watch the rising sign horoscope so you know exactly how it's going to be affecting you. As well, if you want to know exactly what next year is going to look like for you, go ahead and check out the transit calendar I have over on my website. If you want to get updates on your calendar on your phone, this is a little bit hard to see here, but all these little orange marks are updates of when the transits are going to be hitting natal placements in my chart. It's really awesome. It's only $20, and it's like I actually enjoy it a lot more than I was anticipating. But if you want to just keep up to date and know exactly what transits are hitting the placements in your chart right there on your calendar, you don't have to download another app. Go ahead and check out my website. They are there as well. It supports the channel because I don't know if you guys ever noticed, I don't have any ads. It's all supported from you guys, whether that's buying the transit calendar over on my Patreon or buying a consultation from me, booking a consultation with me, which is probably the best way to get an idea of what the year ahead is going to look like for you. Also, if you're listening to this as well, this is going to be posted on the Astrology Report podcast channel, so that's going to be available on Spotify and Apple. But if you're listening to this, make sure you check out the video because there will be a lot of visuals. So let's first go over the major transits of 2024. First off, Pluto's going into Aquarius, and it's going to be there's two ingresses of Pluto in Aquarius. The first one is going to be January 20th, and the next one's going to be November 19th. Pluto will retrograde back into Capricorn, and 2024 is the last year it goes back into Capricorn. So we will talk more and more about Pluto and Aquarius as time goes on. I already did a very long and extensive podcast on it, on the delineation. So if you want to know about the history of Pluto and Aquarius, check it out. But those are two major transits that we get. Why I think the last one is really important is because between November of 2024, right around the election time, to July of 2025, so about a 7-8 month period, every single major planet will move into a new zodiac sign. Pluto will go into Aquarius and it will stay in Aquarius. Then by 25, Neptune will enter Aries, Uranus will enter Gemini, Jupiter enters Cancer, and Saturn enters Aries. Why I think that's significant is, without even going into the meaning of the significance, if astrology is just telling us the quality of the time and every single major planet is moving into a new zodiac sign, there's clearly some sort of story there where a lot of major things, a lot of major stories and narratives shifts between 24 and 25. But we get 2 Pluto into Aquarius ingresses, and on this November 19th one, this will be the last time Pluto leaves Capricorn, and it stays in Aquarius for the next pretty much 20 years. We have a Jupiter Uranus conjunction happening on 4/20. This one I've got my eye on. We're going to talk a little bit more about what my predictions are as we go into 2024. Well, I should say once we're in 2024, because I've got a couple ideas. However, I want to know what you guys think this is going to be. Personally, I'm thinking about some CBDC stuff that's going to be happening, and we'll talk more about that as time goes on. But this is a major transit, and it's on 4/20. Super easy day to remember. April is probably the craziest month of this year. There's a lot going on in April. Then we get to May, and on May 25th, Jupiter is going to ingress into Gemini. So Jupiter transits one sign per year. So every year, Jupiter is moving into a new sign. Really easy to remember. But Jupiter moves into Gemini. It moves into its sign of detriment, where it doesn't do all that well. And of course, we will talk about it. We have a Venus Cazimi in Gemini. And why this is important is every year and a half, Venus goes retrograde, and then every year and a half, Venus has her exterior conjunction to the sun. The far side of the sun, she goes Cazimi, and it's kind of this refresh, restart thing. And why I think this is important is because Jupiter will, it's like the sun, Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury all ingress into Gemini within like a week of each other. So there's a lot of shifts into Gemini right as we start June. And then we have one of our more meta long-term things that we've got going on, which is Jupiter making a square to Saturn. So when Jupiter and Saturn conjoin each other, square each other, go opposite one another, this is kind of a more of a long-term story. This past year in 2023, we had the Jupiter-Saturn sextile, which a sextile is not the biggest transit in the world. A square is going to be a little bit more in our faces. But why this is important is Saturn is still in Pisces. It's in that Jupiter-ruled sign. And Jupiter will square Saturn in its sign of detriment. So there's kind of a lot of Jupiter stuff that we're going to have to be navigating throughout this year. And we get 2 of them. The first one's on August 19th, and the next one is on December 24th before we go into the new year. And then in my opinion, what is the biggest highlight of this year is the Mars retrograde. The majority of the retrograde happens in 2025, but we get a very long and very extensive shadow period, all happening, of course, during the next presidential election. I wonder what that will look like. It's going to be a pretty rough retrograde, and the way I've been trying to explain it to people is the first half of 2024 is kind of wild. Like, there's a lot of things going on. The summer gets boring. Like, the summer's not too much action. We get the Jupiter-Saturn square, but other than that, it's kind of like not that big of a deal. And then once we get to the fall and the winter is like when we start seeing this Mars retrograde thing. And the Mars retrograde will play a really big role into 2025, which I will briefly discuss in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. We start January off with Mercury stationing direct on the 1st. I absolutely love this. The big reason is
we're not only going to have Mercury station direct on the 1st, but Jupiter stations direct, like on December 30th or December 31st. Is there a 31st of December? I don't remember. Either way, we start the new year off with both Mercury and Jupiter station direct. All of the planets are direct at this point. So I think this new year is going to feel better in terms of moving forward with things, feeling like we can move forward, having that new year, new you kind of mentality and energy behind you. Last year in 2023, we had Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, like right as we got to the new year. So like the new year kind of took a second to start, but this time everything starts to move forward. And I really, really like that. And of course, Mercury stations direct
in Sagittarius. So this is coming back to all of the stuff that Mercury was retrograding through during December. And if you're not subscribed to the channel already, I would, because I will also be making a video about this Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius/Capricorn. You guys don't want to miss that. Then on January 4th, we get Mars going into Capricorn. Why is this a highlight? The reason it's a highlight is typically Mars moves signs every 6 weeks. And what's nice about paying attention to the Mars transits is Mars is our energy, our drive, ambition, fighting, things like that. And Mars is going to be exalted in Capricorn, meaning Mars is going to do really, really well. Mars in Capricorn is like a very efficient system, a very it's kind of like when your schedule is on lock and, you know, you're waking up early, you're doing your workouts, you're getting everything kind of done. That's Mars in Capricorn. It's really good at using energy, especially to like a strict system. So as we start the year off with Mercury going direct and Mars ingressing into Capricorn, the year starts off with a really ambitious, good energy.
And the big thing I wanted to kind of say is I'm going to be kind of briefly describing each month as we go along. And as we get to January 4th, Mars goes into Capricorn. Eventually, as we go through January, Mercury is going to go into Capricorn. And then, of course, Venus will go into Capricorn. January is business. Like, it's about business. It's about getting shit done. It's about being, some people get all weird in the astrology world, like, capitalism's the worst thing ever, and that work is a capitalist construct. I think you guys get way too ahead of yourselves with what you're talking about. But being productive is good. Having energy and putting your energy into something good that gives to other people, where you are getting things done, it is very rewarding. It's activating all of those dopamine sensors in your brain. That's what January is for. Efficiency, getting work done, focusing on business, whatever that looks like for you. But it's very straight to the point. It's very simple. I really like January for that.
And so then we get to the next big transit, and that's Pluto going into Aquarius. And there's kind of a lot to talk about here because the sun will ingress with Pluto into Aquarius. One of my biggest issues right now in terms of figuring out what Pluto and Aquarius means is like so much of me wants to attach AI to it. But what's so funny is like the AI stuff happened like December of 2022, like when ChatGPT all came online, and it wasn't for like 3 or 4 months that Pluto was going to go into Aquarius. So I'm a little struggling with that one. The whole Pluto and Aquarius thing is a big deal for a multitude of reasons. If you're familiar with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 Aquarius and Pluto hitting that degree and the whole triplicity shift and all of that jazz, it's kind of a bigger story in it of itself. But as Pluto goes into Aquarius, what I think that you need to look for is think about like March through like May of 2023. And did you feel a significant pressure come off of one part of your life? And did you feel more of a tense pressure and more of maybe even an anxiousness or maybe even more of a, corrupted fear going into a different part of your life? I know all the Capricorn risings are going to be stoked of Pluto leaving their first house, or even the Cancer risings, Pluto leaving your 7th house. If you're a cardinal rising sign, so Libra, Aries, Cancer, Capricorn, Pluto is getting out of those angular houses. The pressure is off, but the pressure gets turned on for the fixed rising signs. So Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. And so that's kind of the general way I want to look at Pluto and Aquarius as of this moment, is like the pressure and the fear and the, just overall like anxiety and fear are leaving one part of your life and moving into another. And some people are going to be like, but I want it to go away completely. And it's just like, well, that's not how life works. Like, certain parts of your life are going to be really crazy, and then as time goes on, they won't be as so crazy, and then another part of your life will be crazy. And that's how I'm kind of just reading this in terms of this general horoscope. But of course, in the rising sign horoscopes, we will talk more about that. But let's look at January. I
wanted to pull up the chart here because look, Pluto enters Aquarius right with the sun. In fact, the sun almost enters Aquarius first. So if the sun is our willpower and our vitality and energy, the sun will be entering detriment, meaning we don't have all of that confidence, that willpower, kind of low energy. It's winter, like I live up here in Denver, and January and February is just like, it's snow, it's gray, maybe we get some sun, but it's really low energy. And what I think is interesting is the Pluto ruling, again, like corruption, power. It's an Aquarius. We're talking about technology. We're talking about society. We're talking about this. Pluto and Aquarius is just, again, the eventual corruption of, society and technology and how we interconnect with each other. Also the healthcare system, but you guys are already aware of that. And of course, we'll talk more and more about it as time goes on because it's a really big thing to kind of fully go into. But I would definitely pay attention to some sort of, AI tech things in the background shifting. So anyway, right, that's January. January is really like hustle, grind,
focusing on, what you got to get done. And so then we move to February. In February, I should say, we get quite a few little fun transits. And the first one is Mars conjoined Pluto. Some of you might be laughing that I'm describing this as fun, but Mars, I think it's fun because it's funny. Like I just have a dark sense of humor. So the darker it is, the funnier it is to me. Mars conjoining Pluto is a power surge. Like if Mars is fights, conflicts, separation, arguments, inflammation, all of that jazz, Pluto is power. Pluto is corporations and governments.
And Mars conjoining Pluto just seems like a power surge. It almost seems like, I'm kind of interested in some sort of a revolt with this, some sort of a without using terms that are going to get people to go one way or the other. It's like I've been pretty harsh on Aquarius if you've been watching my channel for a while, but Aquarius is bigger groups of society, society at large. It is technology, it is healthcare, it is all of that kind of good stuff. Pluto corrupts that. Uh, Pluto brings, death and transformation to bigger crowds of bigger groups of people in technology. And Mars conjoining Pluto just seems like in one version or the other a power grab. Like maybe there's some sort of a again you using riots and protests as a factor in terms of pushing a narrative, regardless of what that, or what the cause of that is, they can use it to push a narrative. We saw that with both the George Floyd thing as well as with January 6th. The other way I look at it is crowds getting out of control. So again, both of those things kind of resonate there. But on a more personal level, I almost look at this as a deep need to like unsubscribe. Not from me, but like Mars conjoining Pluto is like, I am not liking this crowd anymore. I am not liking these people I associate with. I need to separate. I need to cut. The problem is Pluto has the reins here where it might be a little bit deeper than you think. Like, you ever tried to delete like your Facebook account? Like it's not as simple as just hitting delete. You got to do this, you got to do that, and everything's all tangled up in one another to where you may not get that, ability to do that. Now, as we keep going into February,
we will have Venus conjoining Pluto, where what's kind of weird about this is it's a two-way street. It's Venus conjoining Pluto, and then like 5 days later, Venus conjoins Mars. So there's this really weird shift
with all this Aquarius energy that we've got going on. Mars conjoins Pluto, kind of like extreme moment of crowds and people and separating ourselves and technology and all that kind of stuff. But then Venus conjoins Pluto, where there's this kind of like Venus is fun, Venus is pleasure, Venus is connections. And so I almost look at this as like powerful connections. What's really interesting is how what I've really seen with people, luckily the people that watch my channel, I'm so grateful for you guys because most of you have nuanced opinions about everything that's been going on. And I look at the socioeconomic political landscape and how, regardless of our ways that we want solutions to happen, we're all kind of in agreement of like, shit's pretty fucked. This is not going the way that we want. And Venus conjoining Pluto just seems like powerful connections, powerful bringing groups to people. We're finding the power within that. It is a little bit of fear and corruption based. So again, I always try to say there's a two-way street in everything in astrology, right? Depending on the circumstances, depending on what you've got going in your life, it could go really well, it could go really bad. It's just if it goes really well, it's going to look this way. If it's going to go bad, it's going to look this way. And so Venus conjoining Pluto is also like corruption with love, corruption with, or even, power dynamics being in balance with, pleasure and love and in connections. But the other part of it is like Venus going into Aquarius is like finding either empowerment with your tribe or finding empowerment, like again, unsubscribing, going your own way. Not being so interconnected on the, on like the fucking metaverse type shit. And so there's just seems to be a really powerful shift with how we see communities, with how we see society, with how we see ideas and how to work together. That starts off with like this chaotic moment, but that brings us kind of all together at the end. And that's what I was trying to refer to a moment ago is like, we might all have these different viewpoints of maybe, what side we take, but we're all in general agreement of like, hey, something is going on here. And when you can be more open and share, your own stories and connect with people, there becomes more of an empowerment. There becomes that community, right? And I just think that term community gets thrown so much around nowadays for reasons that like don't really make sense. Like it's like one of those like PR, human resource type words. But this just seems like a dramatic shift. Now, of course, you want to know what Aquarius rules in your chart. So like, for example, if you're a Leo rising, this is going to be quite a dramatic shift related to relationships. If you are let's say a Taurus rising. This is quite a dramatic shift related to career, a lot of energy going on with career, reputation, legacy, and all that stuff. So then we get into our
Next highlight, and that's this Mercury Saturn Cazimi on the 27th and the 28th. Boy, the more I look at this, the more I'm like, this is weird. This is so, and when I say weird, I genuinely mean weird. Like, have you ever had some sort of like it almost reminds me of when you see a magician do like a really good magic trick and it makes you go like, oh, how did they do that? For me, I'm somewhat into magic. I know that's nerdy.
and gay, but I think magic is kind of cool. And I'm talking not like the magic like all you like tarot people. I'm talking about like straight up like sleight of hand stuff. But let's move over to this Mercury Saturn conjunction that we've got on the 27th and the 28th. So why this is weird is, hold on, I'm going to turn this off real quick because this is bugging me. There we go. This will clear things up. That is Cazimis are when a planet conjoins the sun, or the sun conjoins a planet. And a Cazimi is kind of like that planet, like ultimately, in the more ancient, text, it's like that planet is formally dying and it gets reborn. The more like way I would like to explain it is like, okay, there's like a chapter ending and then a chapter beginning sort of a thing. And we get both this Mercury Cazimi, which Mercury Cazimis happen all the time, but it's like with the Saturn Cazimi. Now, why this is weird is Mercury is in detriment in Pisces. So Mercury is like logic, rationale, communication. Mercury Cazimis are like light bulb moments of like, oh, I'm starting this new idea, or, this was communicated to me and now I get to move on to this new territory. And Saturn Cazimi is like, Saturn is now out of quote unquote shadow, meaning all through 2023, Saturn only went up to about 7 degrees Pisces. And now Saturn is charting new territory that it hasn't been in since 1994, 1995, somewhere around there. And so the sun conjoining Saturn is kind of like, okay, reestablishing what our boundaries are, reestablishing what our commitments are, where we need to be more mature, where we need to be more responsible. But all of that happens with Mercury. It's kind of like maybe you're starting a new job. I've been using the whole new jobs analogy a lot for, Saturn moving into a new sign and going retrograde. But this is like you get a new job, but your instructions are so not clear. It is so like, here's your new role and responsibility, and you figure it out yourself. And you're just kind of like, wait, what? Like, I have to be responsible for all this stuff, but no one's going to tell me how exactly things work. That's kind of what this is looking like. And again, this is on February 27th through February 28th. So by the end of February going into March, we kind of get this like shift of like, okay, here's where we're at in terms of responsibility and, duties and responsibility. But I just said responsibility twice, but the instructions are not clear. And it's not that you weren't given instructions. It's that you were given some sort of a message in a communication, but it didn't make any fucking sense at all, and nothing's really clear about it. So to kind of go back for a second,
January is really hustle grind. February is kind of the same, but more communal, more ideas, more about communication. And then the end of February going into March is weird. March is just a weird month in my opinion. And when I say weird, this time I don't mean like, oh, cool magic trick. I mean like, it's kind of a vibe. It's kind of just, again, weird, so to say. Like, again, if you know anyone with Pisces or you have Pisces placements, y'all are just a little bit weird, which is not bad. So then our first transit is Mars square Uranus. I kind of totally forgot about this. I was like, what? Is this correct? So our first transit is Mars squaring Uranus. Is this a big deal? Yes. Is it a bigger deal for some than others? Yes. If Mars is in Aquarius and it's about fights and conflicts and inflammation and separation and cutting, but it's in the sign of like people and societies and technology, and it's squaring Uranus in
Taurus, which is like, upheavals in technology and innovation related to Taurus, right? So like value, food. I look at a lot of this as like kind of similar to the whole AMC stock thing. What was that? It was like AMC and something else. If you weren't familiar, in like 2021, it was like the Reddit like short stop or something like that, where a bunch of people online were pretty much like threw all their money in AMC and like shorted the stock market, made a bunch of money by like kind of like rebelling against the system. That's how I kind of see this. I also see a lot of Mars square Uranus as, again, like, I've used this analogy time and time again, but if you've ever seen the movie Hot Rod, which is one of the best movies, there's a scene where it's like, they're building up towards like the climax of the movie, and it's like after everyone has all this drama, they all get back together and they're all friends again, and they're doing the whole montage downtown. They're singing the song, and randomly, all of a sudden, all these people join in and singing with them. And they're kind of just like making fun of how movies do it, but they like kind of somewhat break the fourth wall where they're just kind of like, why are all these people around us? And it's all good. It starts off all hopeful, and then some guy like picks up a trash can and throws it out a window, and it breaks, and then a riot breaks out. It's like the exact. It's so funny how it just shows like I wouldn't even call it a protest, but just like a large gathering of people just immediately turns into a riot with just like one action. That's how this looks. Now, I don't even want to sit here and say of whether or not a riot is good or bad in a general sense, right? You can nitpick each one that happens and say whether that's good or bad. I look at this more as that, like, this is the energy that's happening, though. Is it something that needs to happen? Like, does there need to be kind of like some social upheaval that really does, fuck some people over? Or is this one of the situations where the upheaval and the, chaos does damage to whatever movement that is? And I think that's kind of like a two-way street with, when you have large groups of people. The other part of it is Pluto is in Aquarius. Like Pluto in Aquarius is just like, again, be careful of the groups that you identify with, and like, all of the people marching for like the pro-Palestine thing, which is, it's totally fine. It's just they're taking your biometric data, they're scanning you, they know your location. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a mask, if you're posting about it, they know who you are. You're on a list. That's just how it works. And that's the Pluto and Aquarius stuff. You got to be a lot more skeptical of groups of people and technology. Might be a good message, you might be a cause that you believe in, but there's a underlying corruption to it that may or may not have negative effects later on in the future. And we've all learned that by now. But anyway, Mars squaring Uranus is some sort of social disruption that really brings a disruption to, I almost look at this as like very similar to in what was it in 2022? We had the trucker protest in Canada, or even like the train people. What do you call train people? Like the conductor or the rail workers protest. That's what it was in America that almost like shut shit down. It's like really like, again, angry group of people making major disruptions to values, to goods, to money, to food. Maybe even similar to the farmer protests that we got in the Netherlands, I believe.
Anyway, that's what we're looking for with Mars square Uranus. Expect a big disruption. And then we get Venus in Pisces. Why is Venus in Pisces important? Is because Venus is in her exalted sign in Pisces. Venus loves to be here. I think this is a time to enjoy things. Venus will be in Pisces for about, like 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks. It's just like when it comes to pleasure and connection and fun and romance, it's so much easier. Like, it's not like I don't want to even say there's no boundaries, because that comes with the stipulation that she will be with Saturn, but pleasure and fun have a much easier time to be accessed. But
the issue with that is, as we get to, this is on March 11th, Venus will be with Saturn. And so there has to be some sort of like long-term commitment here, or something, maybe even sustainable isn't the right word, but like this is why I didn't want to say like, oh, there's no boundaries on this. Like, you could just be fun and express yourself. Saturn in Pisces is with Neptune. Like what we thought was illusionary and grandiose, and a lot of that social media related, because again, Neptune's ingress into Pisces pretty much started with like the real rise of social media. And when I say the real rise, and yes, there was MySpace and even Facebook, it was really that 2012, 2011 time when Instagram came online and the iPhone and all these apps became more accessible, that you saw that. Now, Saturn being in there is we're kind of getting disillusioned from all of the media stuff. A lot of it's becoming cumbersome. A lot of it's becoming too much. It's too overwhelming. Like Saturn in Pisces is like sobering up what Neptune caused over the past decade. And Venus there is like, okay, how do I have fun in this area while knowing that there needs to be some boundaries here? It's like, for example, can I go out to the bar and not black out over 10 drinks? Can I just have 2 drinks? Like Neptune, when Venus was in Pisces with Neptune before, it was like go and have your bender, go pick up a dime bag, or an 8 ball or whatever. go binge out, you're gonna have fun, and then forget about it the next day. And I'm not condoning that, but like that's kind of the energy. But Saturn is like I'm too old for that, and like how can I have fun? How can I enjoy this? Because that's kind of what the time calls for with Venus and Pisces. But there needs to be some sort of a boundary here. There needs to be some sort of again, a Saturn is a position of authority. Saturn is a position of like again being just responsible. And so I just look at Venus going into Pisces is like, all right, hi. I am now responsible for this. Saturn's been in Pisces for like a year at this point, but I can have fun here too. Like you don't just like, for example, if you go sober, you don't have to avoid going out with your friends or spending time with friends. You can, you just don't drink. Like it's that simple. And you can have fun while still having the boundaries and the limits. That's pretty much what I wanted to say here.
And so Venus goes into Pisces, and then on March 18th, Mercury is going to enter shadow. At this point, Mercury is in Aries, and like I said before, the reason why March is weird is we get all of this Pisces stuff, essentially. I'm not talking about Mars moving into Pisces just yet. That will come up. But with Venus, Saturn, the Sun, and Neptune all in Pisces, we're kind of trying to finagle what this Pisces shit is in our lives right now. But then Mercury enters shadow, and this builds us up to
April. April's a really, really crazy month. So Mercury enters shadow on the 18th. It will enter shadow on Rahu. So Mercury is about communication and ideas. We are going to get our first Mercury retrograde of the year in Aries. So the sign of, again, fighting, combat, intention, that spark of life. Like Leo is the sustainment of like fire and energy versus Aries is like, that, what is that shit called when you get a knife and a little thing to like spark a fire in the woods? Forgot what that's called. That's kind of like what Aries energy is. And Mercury, our mind, the way that we communicate is really focused on that. It's like, yeah, I want to do this and I want to do that. Like Aries is very ambitious. It's a cardinal sign. They want to begin things. So Mercury's thinking about beginning something. But it's on Rahu, so it's like cranking that up to 11. It's like, I'm going to start, not only am I going to start a business, I'm going to start a business that is better than Amazon, and it's going to be big. It's going to be huge. I think of Seinfeld. He's like, it's the best, Jerry, the best. That's kind of the vibe. And as we get more and more to April, things get more and more turned up. April's really, really wild. And March is kind of like the weird time before it. So Mercury's going to enter shadow on Rahu. We're kind of taking things to an extreme mentally, really having a hunger for a certain idea or communicating in a certain way, maybe needing to tone it down a little bit.
Which we'll get to. And then we have the lunar eclipse in Libra on March 25th. Okay. Why is this important?
Well, number one, it's an eclipse. Duh. Eclipses are always going to be important. But more importantly is the nodes, which are these little squigglies that represent where the eclipses are at any given point, moved into Aries and Libra in July, late July of 2023. We did not get a lunar eclipse in Aries. And we had a full moon in Aries that was at the very end of September, and it was not an eclipse. Then we actually got our first eclipse in Libra, our first solar eclipse in Libra. I believe it was either October 13th or 14th, one of those days, maybe October 12th. It's like the second or third Saturday of October. Think about what was going on in your life during that. Because this eclipse brings all that kind of up. Where that was a solar eclipse where it was kind of planting a seed, something from the past coming back up, becoming more relevant, kind of a very low bottom. This brings it more into fruition. This brings it more into your face. Now, the sun, though, is in Aries. We are, again, our energy, our willpower. It's spring. We're feeling good. We're feeling horny. We're feeling excited. That's the whole spring energy, right? Here in Denver, right when it's becomes spring, it'll still snow, but you'll see the tulips starting to pop up, and they're so beautiful. They're so vivid. As you can tell, like the older I get, the more I turn into a bird and a flower nerd, where I'm like, oh, look at that plant, or look at that bird. Which, I mean, it's just one of those things where I was 0, I was like, that's whack. But now I'm like, look at that bird, it's so cool. So anyway, the sun goes into Aries, we have all this energy, but then this lunar eclipse happens in Libra, where there's still, like, the south moon is draining and exhausting, and it's letting go, and it's moving on from something, and this is the moon. So where you are talking about emotions, here we are talking about, like, things very up close and personal to us. And it's in the sign of Libra, so we are talking about relationships. We are talking about, diplomacy. We are talking about, working with other people. What is our sense of justice? What is our sense of being right? What is our sense of working together with people in balance? And Venus, the ruler of this, is like pretty near Saturn. So I look at this as like, hey, if I want to take this charge in this direction here in my life, I need to also make some sacrifices. I need to take something a little bit more seriously. And this opens up the doors for eclipse season, right? Eclipse season is the very wild 2 weeks that we get every 6 months. Like eclipse season is like a fever dream during the year. And we get two of them, right? So if we get eclipse season, this is when everything starts to get wild. The only other thing that I want to bring up is Mars enters Pisces at this point. Pay attention to this. Mars has some dignity in Pisces because it does have triplicity in the water signs. Mars in Pisces isn't bad. I think a lot of it is like kickboxing, working more with the feet. Mars in Pisces is also very kind of like, again, like feeling the ground and knowing what step to take. I think of Mars and Pisces as if you have ever walked barefoot through a river, through a creek, you can't really see the rocks. You have to kind of maneuver with your feet blindly and know which step to take. So, pay attention to Mars and Pisces. That will become very relevant here in just a minute. So, like I said,
April is the craziest month, and let's talk why. We get a Mercury retrograde on April 1st. Predictions about Mercury stationing retrograde on April 1st in Aries. I guarantee you there will be at least one New York Post or
New York Times or LA Times article about a April Fool's story gone terribly wrong. And I feel like that happens every year, but Mercury is the planet of is the trickster, and it goes retrograde in Aries where this is kind of like I can think of very morbid examples of like Mercury retrograde in Aries where it's like a gender reveal party and someone used like fucking tannerite or something like that. It just like really blows up in someone's face. But we get Mercury stationing retrograde right on the first. This is again a slowdown, a delay, a rethinking, it's like Mercury going into shadow is kind of saying, okay, am I going to do this? Is this what I'm doing? Mercury retrograde is kind of saying like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to do all these changes first. I need to get all the back end ready to go. For example, it's like I opened up a restaurant one time in Vegas. Like it was like a chain, and it was a very small chain. And we started the job I think like a month before the first day it opened. We had to learn the whole menu. We had to learn all the stuff. We had to go through training before we actually had on the spot training. That's how I look at it, like a Mercury retrograde. We're relearning, we're rethinking, we're recommunicating. There are some delays, there are some problems in what we're saying. And it's in Aries, right? Fights, conflicts, ambition. Look at what Aries rules in your chart, and there's kind of this whole redo in this area, which is important because there's a lot of attention going on here. So Mercury stations retrograde.
And then we get a solar eclipse in Aries. Now, we're going to talk about that, but I'm going to talk about that in tandem with Mars conjoining Saturn. So a solar eclipse is typically a big deal either way, but Mars-Saturn conjunctions are also very big deals. Why are they big deals? Well,
big deals because they're both of the malefic planets conjoined together. Now, one of my favorite examples of a Mars-Saturn conjunction was literally the day that lockdowns happened. Now, COVID, if you guys haven't even been through this, I don't even know if I know I've made a video on Patreon about this, but COVID was the Saturn South Node Pluto conjunction. There was like an eclipse on it on like December 21st of 2019. That was like the first time the newspaper was like, weird new virus in Wuhan. But then the lockdowns didn't start until like the very end of March, and Saturn ingressed into Aquarius. Saturn is about governments, rules, authorities, restrictions, and limitations. And it entered Aquarius, the sign of society and people. And then Mars entered Aquarius and conjoined Saturn at like 0 degrees Aquarius. Mars is separating and cutting and inflammation and fighting. And it's like the government said, separate yourself from society, stay at home. Mars-Saturn conjunction, end of March of 2020. Really, I can't get over how explicitly literal that Mars-Saturn conjunction was. My issue with the Mars Saturn conjunction in Pisces is okay. Things are much easier to read in hindsight. Like if you would have asked me the Mars Saturn conjunction Aquarius like summer of 2019, I'd been kind of like, oh, this is what it kind of means on the surface. I didn't think it would. Sometimes, but that was funny voice crack. Sometimes it's hard to predict just how literal a transit is going to be, but oftentimes they are. But we get this Mars Saturn conjunction, and this is genuinely a big deal either way. We get them one every 2 years, but it's a solar eclipse with the Mars Saturn conjunction. One of my small predictions is this whole border thing going on here in America and immigration in general. Europe's got some immigration issues. I'm assuming as time goes on, I'm recording this November of 2023. I'm assuming some sort of more immigration stuff is going to come up in the Middle East. It's a big deal in Europe. It's a big deal in the West, in America. This solar eclipse is literally going over the border to Mexico. And I've told people time and time again, Saturn and Pisces is like permeability with the border. And something that you kind of saw with, for example, and the reason I even say this is, Saturn in Capricorn in the 60s was like the Berlin Wall came up. Saturn in Capricorn in the 80s is the Berlin Wall came down, or late 80s. Then, 2018, 19, 2020, it was all about build the wall, right? Saturn in Aquarius is kind of more of that societal, intellectual divide. Saturn in Pisces, if Saturn builds walls and borders and barriers, Pisces is very permeable. And just Mars conjoining Saturn seems like there's something separating with that. There's something that we're moving on from that. Now, again, when I talk about this in the rising sign horoscopes, you want to look at what part of your chart this rule is, because there will be a heavy restriction and a heavy responsibility that's like you can't go anywhere or do anything until you handle this happening. But again, I'm kind of looking at the whole border situation because, again, the solar eclipse goes over the Texas-Mexico border, and it's a solar eclipse. Solar eclipses are kind of big deals. Like the analogy I always like to use is if you go back 500,000 years ago, back when you were a little Homo sapien, eating bugs and doing whatever, and you're doing your thing, and then all of a sudden the fucking sky goes black in the middle of the day, and you look up and it looks like the demon god is like taking over the earth. It would probably stoke some fear. And if you look through the Bible, eclipses are not good things all of the time. Eclipses are just very potent omens, and everything feels extreme during an eclipse. Like you have to make this sudden reaction, or you have to take this, or it's like our primal instinct to look for shelter and to run away because the sky god is angry at us and he's going to smite us. That is the energy of a solar eclipse, and it's never gone away, in my opinion. And if you've been into astrology for some time, I'm telling you, go back to eclipse season and tell me how extreme things felt during that time. But this is a solar eclipse in Aries, while we have a Mercury retrograde in Aries, and Venus is also in Aries now. But the ruler of this eclipse is conjoining Saturn. It is all of a sudden I feel like I have to take this action, or all of a sudden I am now stuck and responsible with this issue. Like, for example, this is more of an example and not I should say an analogy, and less of a this is like a prediction. Like, for example, if Mars is in Pisces, right, and it rules the feet, Mars conjoining Saturn, and I made that analogy of crossing a creek or a river, and you can't really always see. You have to do things with your foot. It's like your foot gets caught, or you twist your ankle, and now you're stuck in this water. Emergency situation. I'm stuck here. Where do I go? How do I move? The biggest thing is to during this time, again, this is the beginning of April. This is April 8th and April 10th. Calming yourself down, knowing that you don't have to react, you can just respond. It's kind of an extreme time. Now, I know I'm kind of going off here about April, but
April's really the big month because then we get the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Night and day. So what's nice about the solar eclipse is technically
we're out of eclipse season by this point. Technically, some people will argue that it's not until the first lunation after we get the first lunation after the eclipse is when eclipse season is quote unquote done. I think after the last eclipse it's done. But whatever floats your boat. But we get this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which is to continue almost with the analogy of your foot gets caught or you twist your ankle in the creek. It's like you slow down and you stop and you look and there's a big golden nugget right there. And you're like, holy shit, it's 7 ounces of gold. And Jupiter is about abundance and wealth and opportunity and hope and faith. from the beginning of the year till now, it's moving direct. It is like saying, all right, I believe in this. I think of that. I can't remember what it was. I don't remember if it was Seinfeld because I quote Seinfeld all the time, or if it was like a meme online, like a Instagram or a TikTok, and like some guy, or no, he was a comedian, and he was making fun of like how Americans chant for things, and it's like I think in terms of soccer, he's saying like, I believe that we will win, and just how like ridiculous it sounded. But that's kind of like the vibe of Jupiter moving direct from January till here, where it's like if you have that faith, have that confidence, especially Jupiter and Taurus, what is practical, what is stable, what is sufficient, what is sustainable? And it's Jupiter and Taurus, like actually looking at what we value, what is valuable to us. Jupiter is going to conjoin Uranus. Uranus is technology, liberation, freedom, instability. I almost look at this Jupiter Uranus conjunction as one of my little tiny, just throwing a prediction out there, maybe it lands, maybe it doesn't, is CBDC sounds really interesting at this time, like an innovating way of looking at what wealth looks like. I don't think we go fully online with the CBDC stuff for another like 1 or 2 years, but this looks like a major turning point in the CBDC thing. So keep your eyes out for that. But on a more interpersonal level, Jupiter Uranus conjunction, kind of striking gold, kind of like, again, it's like if you bought it, this is almost similar to like if you bought Bitcoin in like 2008 and you couldn't find your password forever, then you found it and you realized if you had $10 billion worth of Bitcoin, stored away. There is some sort of explosive, liberating, adventurous, like wealth opportunity here. It looks pretty good in my opinion. So April has a lot of extreme stuff, but then it ends with this Jupiter Uranus conjunction, which is like sudden liberation here, sudden event that shifts here. It is in the sign of Taurus though, so it's like where we want things to be stable. This is not stable. This is like, for example, I've seen a meme too where there were like somewhere in Rome they were trying to build a strip mall, but then when they were like doing construction, they discovered like an ancient Roman temple, and so they had to halt it. And it's kind of like whoever bought that land is like, oh, I kind of wanted to have, the strip mall, but I mean, this is cool. That makes my property worth more. It's like a sudden discovery that might shake things up and make things not go to plan, but at the end of the day, it's probably pretty good. And like I said before, Jupiter transits are not always the best thing ever. So again, you might interpret this or you might feel this as a lot of sudden change, a lot of instability in your life. And it's one of those things where it's Jupiter. You just got to pray. It's like, for example, turbulence in an airplane happens. And if you fly enough, you get real annoyed at people that are like, oh my God, turbulence. The last flight I took from Ontario to Denver had turbulence the whole way. And it was like, it's one thing when it's like for 2 hours, it's straight turbulence. Okay, that gets a little annoying. But like, when the plane's kind of going down, especially if you're flying in a DIA, like you had a little bit of turbulence and people are like, oh my God. And you start praying, like, calm down. Like you're going to be fine. So anyway. And during this time, Mercury is still retrograde. So then we get to our, I know it's probably bugging people that I'm zooming in and out on the chart, but
deal with it. Then we get to the very end of the month and we have Mars ingressing into Aries, and it is supercharged time. Mars in Pisces is a little bit more slow, which isn't
necessarily a bad thing, but it is very like one step at a time. We will have this Mars-Neptune conjunction, which is like not for today, but then Mars moves into Aries and everything just gets supercharged. The way that we combat, the way that we fight, the way that we take action on things is, again, turned up to 11. This is our first Mars and Aries ingress since the North Node has been here. So this is like, it almost reminds me of like if someone littered $100 bills in the street, like you would start beating the shit out of people to make sure you get as much money as possible. And you would have even more like, let's say, how would you act if there was a bunch of dollar bills in the street versus a bunch of $100 bills? You got a bunch of dollars, you might pick up a couple and be like, oh, look what I found. But if it's $100 bills, you'd be like, I've got debt to pay off. Like, I'm going to get this fucking money. Mars is already action, energy, drive, fights, conflicts, and ambition. Going into its home sign, it does really well in, and it's going to be hitting the North Node at some point. It gets turned up. Now, that brings me to May.
Because May is arguably the best month of this year. May is pretty sick. Now, there's kind of a lot to talk about. Well, there's only really one thing to majorly talk about with May that isn't on here. But let me just go ahead and show you.
Before I go into everything. So when we start May, we have Mars in its domicile. And I want you to look at everything in this Taurus part. What does Taurus rule in your chart? Because we're going to have Venus in its home sign, which is a benefic planet. Technically, there's going to be ancient texts that argue of whether or not the sun is a benefic or not. I like this, in my opinion, the sun is a benefic. Uranus, you can argue, is kind of goes either way, and Jupiter is definitely benefic. But we have all of these great planets. We have both benefics in the sign of Taurus, in the sign of a benefic. Man, is it good here. Whatever Taurus rules in your chart, man, May is going to be kick ass for that part of your life. Really, really cool. Really, really exciting. So coming back to this,
The only things I brought up were, one, by May 13th, Mercury is going to leave shadow. And so once we actually get to May 13th,
Mercury's out of shadow. Cool. We're done with all that stuff we've been dealing with since like the middle of March, essentially. Like Mercury enters shadow in the middle of March. Mercury's finally done by the time we get to the middle of May. But then Mercury enters Taurus. And now look how much just energy and action is in the sign of Taurus. It's looking good. It is looking good here. Not only with that, but the fact that Mars is in its home sign on the North Node. And if I were going to argue, I feel like the North Node and Mars are kind of besteds in a lot of ways.
we get the Mars North Node conjunction here on the 19th. One of my issues with that is going to be like,
the urge to fight will be significant. I swear I had a video, and me and Parker, my editor, we looked for it and I couldn't find it, but somewhere I made a comment about when Venus left shadow in Leo back in September, I believe, or no, back in, what was it, October? Back in October, when Venus left shadow, a war could break out. And lo and behold, it did. I was not expecting Israel-Palestine, because it's kind of like, Israel-Palestine just reminds me of like a couple that, like, sometimes they're together, sometimes they're broken up, and you have no, depends on the week. I know that's making light of the situation, but like, come on. Anyway, why I bring that up is the North Node in Aries. Like, the North Node is a hunger and is literally in the sign of war, and the South Node is this thing that we don't want to do, that is exhausting and that we need to get away from, or that is taken away from us. It's in the sign of Libra, the sign of peace. It's kind of really simple astrology. Just be like, maybe there will be more war when the North Node, the thing that means more, is in the sign of war. And then Mars conjoins it. So bringing this to a personal level is like the urge to just fight. The urge to just say, you know what? Fuck it. Gloves off, fisticuffs. We're doing it. Is going to be intense at this time. I would urge you to not engage as much as humanly possible. It's one thing when you're defending yourself, but like Mars conjoining the North Node is I always remember they say this in like every school, but like when you're in school, like the principal does a whole like no bullying thing, and it's like, don't fight people either, because one time a kid punched someone in the face and they fell and hit their head and died. Like, that's very Mars conjoining the North Node, where it's like it only takes one punch and that person could die. I know they say anything like make sure you don't fight, but that's real shit. Like, people can fucking die over like a hit. And I look at this as like, let's try to temper off that energy. Let's not be as extreme. And how do we transmutate that into something productive? Mars conjoining the North Node is like, you got a passion project. You got it. Like, let's say you're Scorpio rising and Aries rules your sixth house. You are busy with work. You got some issues with pets going on, and you are really killing your diet and routine. Like, that's Mars Rahu. It's like we're turning that whole area up to an extreme, and it's good. It's Mars and Aries. Like, yeah, we want to fight. Yeah, we want to take on this energy. And then, of course, too, at the same time, we have like the Sun-Jupiter conjunction and all that stuff. But that's kind of what the next thing is for, is we get the Sun-Jupiter Cazimi in Taurus. But I didn't bring that
up on these slides because literally like in 6 or 7 days after that, Jupiter enters Gemini. And we get into a whole new chapter. And this is as we end May.
But I really want you guys to enjoy May. It's the best month of the year. We get Venus ingressing into Gemini, and then we get Jupiter ingressing into Gemini. This is the way I've been trying to explain it is like when you're watching a movie and they build up and build, like they stay on one scene and it builds up and it builds up and it builds up, and then it changes like to a different scene. Like you didn't get to finish the buildup of that scene, but like now we're on to something different. That's what this reminds me of, because then the Gemini stuff comes out. Now, Jupiter in Gemini. If Jupiter is about faith and optimism and abundance, Jupiter is in detriment because Jupiter has to work to the will of Mercury. Mercury rules Gemini, and Mercury is going into a new zodiac sign and retrograding just about every goddamn day. And Mercury changes its mind. Mercury has different information. Mercury miscommunicates things. So Jupiter is kind of like, I need to have more faith and belief in this area. But Mercury is like, again, I brought this up in maybe a couple weeks ago, but like Mercury is rational, Jupiter is abundance, and like those two things are diametrically opposed to one another. It's like, well, abundance is not rational, and rationality means there is no like abundance. So Jupiter being a detriment here means like the idea of having faith by just sheer willpower or just by sheer like, tapping into that's going to be difficult. Jupiter and Gemini is kind of also balancing two things. Like the way I've been trying to put it is Jupiter and Gemini is like you can't be a Muslim and a Jew at the same time. I'm sure there's someone out there with it, but it's like, oh, are you really doing it? Like there's two belief systems really collide with one another. Um, that's more of an example or like an analogy, I should actually say. So Jupiter going into Gemini is faith will be weakened. What our beliefs are will become weakened because Jupiter is now in like Gemini, where it's like we can't just believe whatever. Like there has to be some rational thought behind it. And the fact that this year we will have Saturn and Jupiter making a square, which is one of the things we're going to talk about as we move on. It's like Saturn's in Jupiter's ruled sign, and Jupiter is going to go into detriment, eventually make a square to Saturn. It's like this is kind of like when our beliefs are challenged in a really big way, which is fine. Maybe we need that. But I just can't get over the stark difference
of May being all about this Taurus stuff. Life is good, charcuterie boards, a picnic. We're all having a good time. And then Gemini, and it's just like a whole bunch of change. So let's go ahead and talk about June. But I need a little bit of water. Water break. I almost choked on my water and did a gigantic spit take. And I'm not editing this video, so that would have stayed in. So I'm super glad that didn't happen. Anyway, we get to June 4th and we get the Venus Cazimi.
Why is this important? Again, because Venus isn't retrograding. We got to talk about Venus at some point. So, notice what's all going on here now. So everything that was just in Taurus is now in Gemini, right? We're going, like, Taurus is like everyone. It reminds me of, at a wedding. Like at a wedding during dinner, everyone's really kind of silent and eating. And then afterwards, when everyone's done eating, it's yapping. Everyone's meeting everybody. Everyone's talking. Everyone's got a few drinks in. That's kind of the energy of all this Gemini stuff. But why I want to talk about the Venus Cazimi is Venus, just like Venus goes retrograde in the same exact zodiac sign every 8 years, well, Venus goes Cazimi every 8 years in the same exact zodiac sign. I want you to think about 2016. Around May to June, probably the more part of beginning of June of 2016. And what does Venus rule in your chart? And where did she go Cazimi in your chart? For me, Venus rules my 11th house of friends and my 6th house of like jobs. And it went Cazimi like on my Venus. And that was like when I first moved to Denver. And I was checking IDs at a bar, but I was 19. It's a long story. Like I was underage, but I was working at a bar checking IDs. Really funny. It was right across the street from DU. So a bunch of underage kids always went there. And I ended up meeting like all of the original friends I met in Denver from that job. Bartenders, we were all doing bad things. But that's like where I met them and I gained like 6 new friends, like just working from that job within like the first week. And that was on that Cazimi, which again is very personal. It was on my 11th ruler of friends, Venus, and my 6th ruler of coworkers and employment, Venus. But what was going on in the beginning of 2016? What kind of had a chapter shift for you at the very beginning of 2016 related to what Venus rules in your chart? Because we're having a very similar moment here once we get to June. And look, we have like this Mercury-Jupiter conjunction here. Mercury is also in a Tom sign and it's conjoining Jupiter, which is also kind of a lot. Again, the easiest way to put it is going from this Taurus energy of, where everyone's sitting down at dinner, we're all eating, so it's a little bit more quiet, and then everything goes in Gemini. We're all done eating. Now we're got a few drinks in us, so we're all talking and chatting and catching up and walking around here, walking around there. There's some music playing. So maybe some people are starting to dance. That's kind of the vibe of June, or at least at this part of June. So then we get to
June 8th, Mars goes into Taurus. The real only thing at this moment to talk about is this is when things kind of slow down. Meaning, since what did we talk about in April or something like that?
Mars. Yeah, in April, Mars ingress into Aries. Mars going into Taurus is like not as ambitious, being more consistent, And the other thing is all of that Gemini, like not all of the Gemini. We had Jupiter and Venus, Mercury and the Sun, and Uranus all in Taurus. The way I almost would analogize this is like they're eating really, really good food. And then once you like, let's say you're at a wedding, you eat really, really good food. It's fun. But then you start dancing and you have a few drinks, and then you feel your stomach and you're like, fuck. Like that's not a good feeling. That's kind of like Mars going into Taurus. Whatever was going on during that time. Now we're gonna start having some issues with that. Maybe more of a slowdown, maybe more of a inconsistency. Mars is in a fixed sign with Taurus, so it's like it is kind of doing the same thing monotonously, but it's in detriment in Taurus, so it doesn't operate all that well. So it's kind of like really slow moving, actually not really enjoying how everything's going, being a little bit more cranky and stubborn. Stubborn's probably a really good term for Mars in Taurus. That's kind of the vibe here. Um,
Then we have the Mercury Cazimi in June. The only reason I think this is important is we get, gosh, we're an hour into this and I'm
talking about June. The reason I just think that's important is we have a Venus Cazimi in Gemini, and then we have a Mercury Cazimi in Gemini, kind of like on Venus. There's like a whatever house Gemini rules in your chart. It's like a lot of change, like very suddenly within like 2 weeks, like 2 to 3 weeks between the end of May and the second week of June. Of 2024. A lot of significant changes going on there. And this is like a Mercury Cazimi Gemini. Like, there's a lot of clarity on the situation. Coming back to the end of February when we had that Mercury Saturn Cazimi in Pisces, there's a lot of confusion. This is like a ton of clarity here. Really, really like that.
And then we have, of course, Saturn stationing retrograde. So as I've said before, Saturn ingressing into, like, Saturn moving on to new territory is like, okay, this is where I have to be more responsible. This is where I need to be more mature. You're learning the ropes. Then Saturn goes retrograde and it's like, okay, you're not getting like on the spot training. It's like, it's the time to get out of the classroom and step into the real world experience. That's how I look at Saturn retrograde. So again, Saturn's still in Pisces. If you haven't already, watch my Saturn in Pisces delineation episode. Watch my Saturn in Pisces YouTube video where I go over how it's going to be affecting every zodiac sign. Watch it so you know what's going on. But whatever part of that chart Saturn is in, like, okay, we know what more responsibility we have to take here. Now it's like, okay, time to get out of the classroom and start applying it in real world and start taking it to the field, essentially. So then we get to July. This is where things slow down. Like, that is the craziest part of this year. The summer into the early fall is not as crazy. The number one thing, I shouldn't say the number one thing, the first thing that we get is going to be Mars conjoining Uranus. What I want you to think about August 1st of 2022. That was the last time Mars conjoined Uranus. Now, it was like either right after that or right before that was when the Nord Stream pipeline blew up, which was kind of like
on point for Mars, like conjoining Uranus, but that was a little bit different because the North Node was there. But this is like super instability. Part of me wonders, and again, this is on the 17th of July. My bad, the 15th of July. Part of me wonders about the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that we get on 420 and what comes after that and how much this doesn't, like, it's like Jupiter-Uranus, cool, I'm going to invest in FTX. And then Mars joins Uranus and it's like, yeah, I got scammed. Like, there's some sort of issue. There's some sort of really destabilizing problem and issue. And it's like almost the exact opposite of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction happening on July 15th. So again, look at like what house Taurus rules. For example, like, if you're a Leo rising, all of that stuff in May, when everything was in your 10th house of Taurus, like work is good, you got a new job, everything's going good. Then by July, it's like, oh, your company is like thinking about declining bankruptcy because like nothing's happening. It's like, it's almost night and day difference. But this is a lot. This is just one day. Mars will be in Taurus the whole time and building up to this, but it's just a day. So I like, again, May and the impacts of how long May lasts versus this just being kind of a day. In my opinion, this uh, it's not going to completely take away all the gains that you made in May. So we like that. The next thing is
Mercury ingresses into shadow. We will have our second Mercury retrograde of the year. Mercury is going to retrograde in Virgo, but it will enter shadow in Leo. So, yeah, we'll talk about that as we get into August. But the next big thing that we have is Mars goes into Gemini. Hey, remember when Mars was in Gemini for like 9 months in 2022 into 2023? Well, I know that you missed having Mars in Gemini for 9 months again. So we get another Mars in Gemini transit. Again, kind of coming back to that idea of
whatever was going on in June, where all that fun stuff was happening in June, we get that return of Jupiter and Gemini is like struggling doing two things at once. Like Jupiter's really good at focusing on one thing and being like, I believe in this one thing, and this is my one mission, my one belief in life. Jupiter and Gemini is like, I can't have these two beliefs. Like it doesn't make sense. Mars goes into there and it's like, oh well, now you're gonna have to do something with it. Now you have to take action on it. And I want you to think about what was going on between October, November, and December of 2022, and January and February and March of 2023. That was the last time we got Mars in Gemini. So this will not be nearly as bad, but it will give you a good idea of what that's going to be about. When we got to June, we had the Venus Cazimi in Gemini. We had the, Mercury Jupiter conjunction and the Mercury Cazimi in Gemini. It was all fun. We're all chatting, right? Coming back to that wedding analogy, this is like, it was all fun chatting with the uncles and cousins you haven't met, you haven't seen in a while. And then, of course, everyone gets like drunk, and then it's like, a fight breaks out. Like there's been so many weddings I used to DJ where just like a stupid fight would break out and the bride cries or, some drama happens. But that's kind of get here. It's like if things get political or things, your grandparent who's still a boomer just says something really mean and it stirs the pot and stuff like that. Like there's something chaotic kind of happening in that area that was just really like new and fresh. And that doesn't have to be bad, but it's just more so like that's just time, the energy. What's nice is that Mars leaves Taurus, so we're not as sluggish. We are more active, and we are going to be a lot more active. But it's doing two things. We're juggling stuff, and I think this is when the levee breaks. Like this is kind of when we start going, oh, I might be taking on too much. I might be juggling too much, which leads us into August. There's a lot to talk about with August. Well, there's only really one big thing
about August, in my opinion. Yes, we have Mercury stationing retrograde. So again, like I said before,
Mercury is going to be at the end degrees of Leo. And then once we get to Virgo on August 5th, Mercury will station retrograde with Venus. Don't really mind this Mercury retrograde, to be honest with you. It's in Virgo, it'll be with Venus, I'll go back into Leo. It's not really making any crazy, it will be kind of squaring Uranus. So again, there's some instability there, but it's not really like I don't know. Like this is just a Mercury retrograde to me. Like whatever. What I've been doing this shit for almost a decade now. Like some people are like, "Oh my god, this Mercury retrograde is gonna be worse." It's like, dude, this is a fucking Mercury retrograde. Where we get like 3 or 4 of these a year. Like it's nothing special. I know but
you're watching me for a reason. These are my opinions, okay? But we get the Mars Jupiter conjunction, okay? Why that's important is 5 days later, we get Jupiter making a square to Saturn. So I want you to think about this for a second. Mars conjoins Jupiter, which is like explosive, right? Like we're doing all of these things, and then Jupiter squaring Saturn is like, it almost reminds me of like a piñata. Like a kid busts open a piñata, candy goes everywhere, and all of these kids rush in to get the candy, and then you realize as the parent who did the piñata, you go, there's not enough candy in this piñata. Now these little poor chump kids that, can't fight another kid to get the candy, now they're the losers and they need their little, achievement badge, a little achievement star. I know I'm being harsh right here, but I'm just making the analogy. Like you're going to realize there wasn't enough candy in the piñata and now you got to give some of the other kids who couldn't get candy. Like it's like, something is not right here, and it starts from doing too much, or there being maybe too many kids is probably the best way to look, or
to continue with that analogy. So let me show you. So we get to August 14th. Boy, do things really kind of blow up here. Mars fights and conflicts in Gemini, the way that we communicate, using words as our weapons. Mars and Gemini is being very quick and witty, and it's conjoining Jupiter, where Jupiter is like, have you ever had someone just say a one-liner to you that just blows your whole worldview apart? Or on something. That's what Mars conjoining Jupiter and Gemini reminds me of. Jupiter is already barely holding it together in Gemini, where Jupiter wants to have faith. Jupiter's like trying to be like, well, does that even make sense? Is that even real? I don't know, man. Like Jupiter and Gemini is just not as good at being like faithful. Like Jupiter and Gemini typically does better when it has two things to work with. But and that's more for a natal perspective. Like if you have Jupiter and Gemini, like you are probably going to do better with like two ways of thinking. Like that's just how it is. Like you can't really avoid that. You just got to know which two things you're doing. But transit Jupiter is like, for the rest of us, that may not be easy to cope with. And I think Mars conjoining Jupiter is like, this is clearly taking on too much. And why I think this Mars Jupiter conjunction is so much more important than, like, yeah, of course, Mars conjoining Jupiter is going to be somewhat of a big deal, regardless.
But 5 days later, Jupiter squares Saturn. That to me is interesting because, and again, that's on the 19th.
Because as Jupiter squares Saturn, the whole point of this is like Saturn is in Pisces. Sorry, that's the point of the video where I gotta kick my feet up. Saturn and Pisces is like, okay, I need to have more discipline and boundaries regarding this area of my life. A Jupiter ruled area. Saturn and Pisces. Like Pisces is the very internal spiritual part of ourselves. Saturn and Pisces is the yin part of ourselves. Like what does the inside say? Sure, you might have these exterior beliefs, but like do you actually resonate with those? Do you actually believe it? If that makes sense. Like you can say things, but do you feel that? And Jupiter squaring Saturn after that Mars Jupiter conjunction might make you go, I can't do these two things. Like I'm going to be making a video about Jupiter and Gemini, but the way I look at it, Jupiter and Gemini, I'm going to do these two things. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And then as it squares Saturn, you kind of go, I got to pick one or the other. And again, it's not going to be as easy as just dropping this one thing and then moving on. Like it's going to take you probably from August to about December to really drop, one thing or the other. It's like you kind of get to this point, you go, I need to change something here, especially because Saturn is retrograde still. So there is this all right, I'm now in the real world. I'm now in the field applying these things. And Jupiter is like, oh, just because it made sense in the classroom doesn't mean it makes sense all the time in the field. Like sometimes you have to call an audible. And if you're relying only on what you were taught in the classroom and not relying on your own sense of like creativity and figuring it out, like you're going to get stuck. So this just seems like a dilemma with like, again, Jupiter's like our faith or belief, our beliefs are not in alignment with like where we need to be realistic. That's kind of the problem here. And where our beliefs are like in detriment. Like, it actually doesn't really make all that much sense. And Saturn's like, hey, Cat, you're not really being fucking realistic here. Saturn's also in the superior aspect to Jupiter. I was thinking about the last time Jupiter squared Saturn, which was actually 2016. 2016 was a fun time, but Jupiter was in Virgo, squaring Saturn in Sagittarius. So very similar. Jupiter in Virgo was in detriment, but Saturn was also in a Jupiter-ruled sign. But Jupiter was in the superior position, where Jupiter in Virgo was like, okay, I just need to get prepared. I just need to get detailed. I just need to get organized and get clear on things. And I might have to have more faith in that area. That might be hard, but I can do the thing. This is different. This is like, hey, we're past that. Like, you need to concentrate here and not be so divided. You need to concentrate and not be so split, if that makes sense. So August on the surface isn't the biggest, but I think this Jupiter-Saturn square on a larger scale, on a larger timeline, is kind of a big deal. Plus, Venus will be squaring Jupiter in opposite Saturn in her sign of fallen, so both benefics will be fallen. Mercury will be retrograde squaring Uranus. Just around this August 19th, had a lot of things unraveling. And again, it's not the worst thing. It's just kind of like you live and you learn is the easiest way to put it. Okay. So let's go ahead and do this. Sorry, I'm trying to get a little bit more well organized here. There we go. Let's do that. Does that work? No, it doesn't work. Pardon me for trying to make this a little bit easier. I guess this didn't work. We'll just do that. Okay. So anyway, that's August. All right. That brings us to
September. Again, September has bigger stuff, but it's more of a buildup, and I want to explain why. So the big three things that we get in September are, number one, Pluto going back into Capricorn. So this is kind of going back to the old shit for a second. I'm only going to touch on this lightly because we could sit here and talk all day about Pluto going back into Capricorn. But Pluto's in Aquarius that whole time. So there's a lot of new things going on. But then Pluto goes back into Capricorn where there's a little bit of this like, oh, how was I handling the past? Now the pressure's back in that one area of my life. So that's kind of a bigger deal. And you'll really, I feel like I feel the Pluto retrograde or retrogress into Capricorn sometimes more than I feel the Pluto in Aquarius shift. So we'll see that. The next big thing is like 2 days later, Venus will conjoin the South Node. This isn't the biggest thing ever. The only reason
I'm even putting it here is that it's like September isn't the craziest month, but what? Right now, as I'm recording this, Venus is kind of like on the South Node. There's a little bit of bittersweet ending, a little bit of like, I'm moving on from this. Yes, this is nice, but I don't want to do this anymore. Something's got to change here. But then we get to the actual big highlight,
which is Mars ingresses into Cancer. And why is this a big highlight? That's going to be because Mars is going to retrograde in Cancer. We get a long time with Mars in Cancer. Mars doesn't like to be in Cancer. Mars is about battles and conflicts and inflammation and being angry. And Cancer is about like babies and, you know, feeling safe and nourished and protected. And so Mars doesn't do well there. Mars does not vibe in Cancer all of the time. And so Mars goes into Cancer on September 4th, and that's kind of the only thing. Whoops, that was the wrong
button. That's kind of like the only thing. Because we don't even get the eclipses, I don't think, until October. Let me double check that. Yeah. So Mars goes into Cancer. Whatever Cancer rules in your chart, just know there's going to be some problems there, and that you're going to be spending the next 6 months taking care of that. Like, again, I literally mean 6 months. So let's go to this button.
Ignore this slide. I'm sorry. I made the white one on accident. So we get to October. Now, October is where we start seeing things. Like, again, September's kind of the most boring month, but October is like, all right, now we're starting to see some problems on the horizon. Because number one, we get our solar, our first. I shouldn't say our first. This is actually, I think, our last solar eclipse in Libra. Again, we're coming back to that
at March time. We're coming back to that end of March of 24. We're going back to that October of 2023. Very similar. A solar eclipse, a massive change, a massive shift, this is now done, maybe something from the past coming back up that you have to resolve, and things just moving on from here. So we enter eclipse season again. We enter our second eclipse season of the year. Like I said, this is the most intense part of the year. It's like a fever dream. And this is how we open it up. This is a big transition, a big shift of like, I'm low energy. I don't like doing this. I'm not having the confidence sort of a thing. And I think that's added on to Mars being in Cancer. I mean, like Mars is fallen. Venus is in detriment. Jupiter is in detriment. The planets don't have a lot of dignity here. Like, again, so it's kind of like almost embarrassing, low energy, okay?
So then we get to Mars ingressing into shadow 2 days later. Now, we're going to talk about the first couple months of 2025 because there's so much that happens, but we don't get to this point again until
2025. So Mars went into shadow on the 4th. Actually, maybe it's on the 5th. I feel like you got all of these days like one day backwards, so sorry, but you'll know about it. If you watch the weekly horoscope, if you're on the Patreon, you get the rising sign horoscopes in the month ahead. You'll know what day it is, okay? We're just getting a general vibe of the next year. Mars enters shadow. Mars will not come back to this degree until like February or March of 2025. So we're looking at October. Mars is going to move forward, station retrograde Leo, come back here, And so whatever's going on here, and again, this is Mars in Cancer, like a feeling, a needing to feel protective or defensive, feeling crabby, feeling emotional. You know, the last time Mars was in Cancer was April to like the middle of May of 2023. How did you feel in April of 23? Like, was this like this crabby, this, emotional, like feeling like you need to fight, but you just didn't have balls? That's kind of Mars in Cancer's feeling insecure with our ability to enact, to combat, to be decisive. We're being a little bit more insecure at this time. In Mars into Shadow, where there's something that's bringing up a big insecurity that we are going to have to address. We get to
The ninth, and Jupiter goes retrograde. And the whole thing with Jupiter going retrograde is now we're at that point where it's like Jupiter is so direct for so long. It's like 10 months of Jupiter being direct.
Jupiter moving forward, and then what? Where are we at here? Oh yeah, so by the 9th, Jupiter stations retrograde. Jupiter going direct is like, I have all of this faith and this is my belief, and Jupiter squaring Saturn, and you're like, oh, that's actually not gonna work. Jupiter going retrograde is like, okay, let's actually digest this. Let's actually think this through. What does this look like? Jupiter and Gemini is like really like, think of like what's that statue, the thinker, or I think it's called the thinker. That doesn't sound right, but it's like weighing two options and just saying like, what is the best choice for me here? What's going to work and what's not going to work? Now, Mars enters shadow and Jupiter stations retrograde in between eclipses.
And by the 17th, we get our lunar eclipse in Aries. This is, I don't remember if this is our last eclipse in Aries. We'll see that when we go into March of 2025. And I know this is for 2024, but like 2024 does not make sense until you understand what 2025 looks like. So we will go over 2025 very, very quickly. But that's kind of the big thing. It does not make sense until you understand what 2025 looks like.
So then we get our last lunar eclipse in Aries. In fact, this may not even be an eclipse because it's so far away. I didn't double check that for you guys. I'm just looking at lunations with the nodes. So, again, Mars is fallen though. And that's going to bring us to November.
As we get into November, now we got some shit rocking and rolling. Now, you guys know what's happening in November. Something I love about being an American is
just how like everything in America like actually does affect the world. And I don't see that from an egotistical way, but it's like, I don't care if you are a Marxist socialist or if you are straight up like a fascist Nazi. Most everyone in the political spectrum all agrees this next election is going to absolutely suck balls. Absolutely suck. And boy, does the astrology really say that. It's not looking good. It's not looking good. But who needs astrology to really say that? So, first off, on November 3rd, Mars goes into Leo. We like that, okay? Mars is like, again, insecure in Cancer, Mars and Leo. It's like, yeah, I'm feeling bold and I'm feeling courageous. I'm on fight. I've got this passion inside of me to take action on something. I have to speak from my heart. I have to be authentic. I have to be integral. Mars and Leo is just like really fighting for glory. Like Mars and Aries is like fighting for fighting. Mars and Leo is like fighting for the glory, or like in the heat of passion. Love that. Now, something to bring up is Mars is going to go opposite Pluto in Cancer, right? Okay, so we get a Pluto-Mars opposition in both Capricorn and Cancer. And then Mars will go to Leo. We're going to feel very bold and we're going to feel very passionate. And so then our next subject is
Mercury enters shadow on the 17th. Oh, the planet of numbers and calculating is in detriment and it's going to enter shadow. Right after a presidential election where everyone is like, the election's rigged and it's the wrong votes and stuff. Well, what could possibly go wrong?
This is just going to be such a shit show. It's going to be entertaining. Oh, my bad. That's on the 7th. Why did I think that was on this is what? Election day? Or is that on the 8th? I always forget what day election day is on. I don't really even pay attention. Mercury enters shadow in Sagittarius. Mercury's about communication ideas. It's in detriment in Sag. What's interesting is Mercury is going to be in Jupiter sign and Jupiter's going to be a Mercury sign. Where I think this Mercury retrograde slash transit through Sagittarius, he's gonna help us kind of like bring into balance and bring into like clarity, like what this whole fucking Jupiter and Gemini shit is about. So I think we need this Mercury retrograde, but I think on like more like mundane level, it's not gonna be that fun. Then oh,
What? Pluto goes into Aquarius right after, and this is the last time Pluto leaves Capricorn, and it is in Aquarius for the next 2 decades, essentially. Oh boy, how fun.
I love that. Pluto then goes into Aquarius, right? Right. Mars is really slowing down here. Pay attention to that. So Pluto goes into Aquarius, like we already talked about.
Then Saturn stations direct. Okay. Oh, I have these mixed up. I'm sorry. Not that the days are mixed up, it's that Saturn stations direct before Pluto goes into Aquarius. We're talking more than a year. We're talking about a literal year from now because I'm recording this on the 18th. So give me a break here. So Saturn stations direct. If Saturn going retrograde again is kind of like we're now getting the field experience. Saturn is like, all right, I've gotten a couple months under my belt of the real world experience. Now I know how things work. Now I'm coming about some confidence in what is my responsibility, what are my duties, what are my obligations, what are my limitations, and what are my strengths, essentially. So I like this for a sense of saying, okay, now I'm moving forward in this area of my life again, whatever that area of Pisces rules in your chart, and feeling better about that responsibility there, feeling more comfortable in that situation. And then right after that, Mercury stations retrograde on the 25th. So like I said,
the whole numbers and who voted for who. It's gonna probably cause some drama. Also, interestingly enough, we'll have like this Mercury-Jupiter opposition. I'm really kind of looking at this, and again, this is like a literal year from now. But that'll be interesting. Mercury goes retrograde, and then that brings us to
December. Mars stations retrograde. Okay. The way I've been thinking about this Mars retrograde as of now,
I'm assuming from a year from now, I'll probably have a more fleshed out of an idea. But Mars in Leo retrograde is like again, it's like fighting from passion. Or maybe another way to look at it is Mars in Leo is going out on stage. And if Mars in Cancer is like feel it like it's like being backstage in the green room, like you're really nervous, and then Mars runs out there, it's like, I'm on stage, look at me, rah, rah, rah. Mars goes retrograde. And that's like someone pointing out, like, your zipper's undone, or you eat massive shit on stage. Like, you just look so retarded. Like, it's super embarrassing. Like, Mars retrograde in Leo is very like the cowardly lion. And so there's this thing of like moving backwards of like, oh, like I actually like now I feel insecure and weak and afraid. I'm going to cower away. And so this is kind of like cowering away from something, which I think in the grand scheme, like I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, we need this or we don't need this, but like given Mars will go into Cancer station direct and move back, like we get a redemption arc. But at this moment, it almost looks cowardly. It almost looks like yeah, I'm gonna fight. It's like all bark, no bite. Essentially, is probably a good way of looking at it. So that's a really big deal. And the fact that this is a Mars-Pluto opposition in Leo and Aquarius after this election it gives a very interesting context to what this next election is even going to look like. So then we get back to
here, Mercury stations direct on the 16th in Sagittarius, okay? And then we have our last Jupiter-Saturn square at the very end of the year.
So now Saturn is direct, Jupiter is retrograde. Like I said, Mercury stations direct, and then on Christmas Eve, Saturn squares Jupiter, where Saturn is like, okay, I'm moving forward now. I know what I have to do. Jupiter being retrograde, though, is like, you just may not have that full faith in yourself at that moment, which is fine. Like, that's not a bad thing. Like, sometimes you have to, it's like fake it till you make it. Sometimes you have to do it in order to believe it. It's like, in order to see, you must believe. And this just seems like, hey, my bad. Let me rephrase that. Let me switch it up. It's like you have to believe before you see, or you have to see before you believe. That's how I kind of look at this, is like you might just have to do something that and take responsibility over that. Like, hey, maybe you don't know what the right answer is. Maybe you don't know what the right thing to do is here, but you know what you must do. Like, maybe it's not the best situation, or maybe you have an insecurity of your capability of figuring it all out and doing it, but you know that you have to do it. And again, this is Saturn overcoming Jupiter while Jupiter's retrograde. So this is a really saying like, I have to do this. This is what I'm responsible for. Even though I'd like to do these two things, it's not going to work like that right now. And that's okay. That's this year. Okay. But now we're going to go over 2025 really briefly because, again, in my humble opinion, 2024 does not make sense until you see 2025. So we get to the beginning of the year. Mars in Leo will be retrograde opposite Pluto. This seems very, like, again, revolting around things. More of that same old, protests and, that sort of a deal, given whatever happens in the election. And maybe it's not another January 6th, but again, this next election, I just don't see it going well from my point of view as of November of 2023. You know, my small little prediction is just, I would imagine if it's Trump versus Biden, Trump's going to win, but they're not going to allow that to happen. So what happens next is really unprecedented. So it's hard to say what they would do next. If it's not Trump, that's also hard to believe. As of right now, he's the front runner. Maybe he goes to jail. I just listened to a Tim Dillon episode where he talked about like, it was at first it was Trump was embedded into the government by Russia. It was the biggest, Kremlin operation in United States history. To now, it's like, oh, he inflated the value of his assets. Like, that's like a really stark night and day difference of them trying to arrest him. And of course, there's like the January 6th stuff, but that's a whole kind of other subject. I, as of my position right now, I can't tell you what's going to happen. All I know is that whoever comes next, be it Trump, be it Biden, be it the ghost of Biden, be it Kamala, be it Gavin Newsom, be it fucking Vivek Ramaswamy, be it Nikki Haley, whoever it is a fuck ton of shit is changing. Whoever comes in next, a fuck ton. My general opinion is the incumbent will not be the next president. But I also don't necessarily believe that whoever the next president is like. Again, I think if it's Trump versus Biden, I think Trump would win, but they're not going to allow that to happen. So there's going to be a different situation. So check this out. Mars will then retrograde back into Cancer, right? Still dealing with the insecurity stuff. And then the nodes are going to shift into Pisces and Virgo. And now that North Node is on Neptune and Pisces, this is like the fake out AI girlfriend, the propaganda, AI war shit. It's turned up to 10 billion. Like, this is very what is even real at this point? What is even real? And that is going to continue. As we go on, we're at the end of January now. Yeah. Pluto is locked into Aquarius, okay? Then we get to about, what is it? Maybe it is about February. Check this out. February 24th, Mars stations direct. So again, Mars entered shadow way back in what? I'm looking real quick. That was October 4th. So that's November, December, January, February. We're about 4.5 months in. Mars comes back to that same degree. It's still in shadow. But then, so Mars stations direct. We're finally moving forward. But look what's going on up here. Not a week later, Venus goes retrograde. We're looking at March 2nd of 2025. I want you to check this out. Venus will go retrograde. Then the North Node leaves Neptune and starts making its way towards Saturn. Then Mercury will conjoin Venus and Mercury will go retrograde. By the way, this is also on a lunar eclipse. This is our first set of eclipses in Pisces and Virgo that we get this happening. Mercury then goes retrograde with Venus. So my point of view as an astrologer is look at everything in the last decan of Pisces in the first decan of Aries. Everything is right here. Saturn, Rahu, Sun, Neptune, Venus, Mercury. Everything is concentrated in really one part of the sky, which I think tells a very interesting story. And this goes on for months, by the way. This goes on for literal months. Then the sun will ingress into Aries. Then Venus goes back into Pisces and conjoins Neptune. Whoa. Then Mercury, check this out. This is so fun to me. This is the new moon in Aries. This is our first this actually might even be an eclipse. I'll have to double check that. But then Mercury and Neptune do the old switcheroo. Look at that. Mercury in Aries, Neptune in Pisces, then boom, Neptune in Aries, Mercury back in Pisces. Now, you might be asking, Cameron, what is Neptune in Aries? Well, the last time Neptune ingressed into Aries, the literal day was the day that the Civil War started in 1860 or something like that. I think it was actually like 3 days later Neptune ingressed into Aries, but also, Venus retrogrades are very good indicators for war. Venus left shadow, Russia invaded Ukraine. Venus left shadow, Hamas attacked Israel. We're kind of getting in that territory a little bit here. This is why I keep telling people, like, war stuff is going to continue for a while. Neptune ingresses into Aries. Also, Neptune in Aries is very, like, just the whole war propaganda and what AI can do and shit like that is just going to be so unbelievable. Like I was telling this with Gordon White linking, 9/11 doesn't even have to happen anymore. They can just make 10,000 fake videos from a perspective that they want of anything happening to sell whatever people want on it. But Neptune and Aries does seem interesting. So then check this. Both Mercury and Venus essentially stationed direct on Saturn. Mercury stations direct on Saturn on the North Node. That's very like, huh? What just happened? And then Venus stations direct on Saturn and the North Node. Okay? Then let me go back to this. Now we're in the middle of April, by the way. So this all started in like February, where we started getting things at the last decade. So now we're like 2 months in. Venus will conjoin Saturn. We'll have this Mercury-Neptune conjunction in Aries, which is like really weird. Venus will conjoin Saturn. Venus will then enter Aries. Mercury's in Aries at this point. So now at the end of April. Then Mars leaves shadow. Right? We didn't even talk about Mars ingressing back into Leo, making a trine to Mercury and Neptune. Mars goes opposite Pluto again. And then Mars leaves shadow. And then Saturn enters Aries. That's really the big thing. Now we're looking at the very end of May. So we've had Pluto going to Aquarius. We've had Neptune ingress into Aries. Uranus will enter Gemini here in 5 minutes. But then Saturn enters Aries. Something to talk about. I'm going to do a whole delineation on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Saturn doesn't actually conjoin Neptune formally until 2026. But it's going to be loud here. Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. I can just go off on all of this stuff. Saturn-Neptune conjunction 1917. U.S. gets into World War I, Russian Revolution. Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 1953. That was like the day that the Korean War ended, as well as Stalin died. Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 89. The USSR formally dissolves. The Berlin Wall comes down. There's some other stuff that went on. Now we're getting another Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Texas was also formally became a state with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I'm kind of looking at Texas, what could possibly go on there in terms of the whole United States geographies thing. So there's a lot, okay? We're not even done. We get into and so this is again the first like 4 months after whoever comes into the president next is like, these are all kind of big things. Venus, again, will also leave that shadow area. I just wonder how much more stuff comes up. Jupiter enters Cancer. That's like the best part of 2025. Like Jupiter's exalts in Cancer. We want Jupiter in Cancer. And then it's not until July we get Uranus and Gemini. Uranus and Gemini will be a big deal for a multitude of reasons. I'm looking at July of 2026 Let me get to that real quick. Uranus will go back into Taurus, and then it goes back into Gemini. And we get a Mars-Uranus conjunction at the first decade of Gemini. This is July of 26. Why is this important? The USA was born with a Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. U.S. Revolution. There was a Mars conjunction in Gemini, a Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini during the Civil War. There was a Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini when the Allies invaded Italy. There was another Mars conjunction in Gemini when we fucking nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then there was a, and then this is the next Mars-Uranus-Gemini conjunction. So we saw Neptune going into Aries. And again, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. We have Uranus going into Gemini. Like those, Saturn-Neptune is like something going on with Russia. Mars-Uranus and Gemini. That has been a thing for war here in America, including the Civil War multiple times. And Neptune going into Aries. The last time that really happened was the Civil War. There is shit hitting the fucking fan. I don't say that to scare people, but like, my job as an astrologer is to like, hey, this is what the future looks like. It is up to you to decide. It's in your best interest. What's going to be good for you? This isn't like, oh, I think this is going to be
Nuclear annihilation. Everyone dies. Boo-hoo. We will rebuild is like a one way to look at it. But I just look at it as these next, again, 2024 makes more sense when you see how much happens between 2025 and 2026. This is why I said 2024 is the buildup to 2025 and 2026. And I think a lot of that is correlated with the next president and all of that stuff. But just to recap, I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but it's just important to understand that is to recap January of 24, January, February, like hustle grind of 2024. March gets a little bit weird. April is kind of all types of shit happening. May is the best month. June, everything kind of switches. July is a little boring. August, we have to make some serious decisions. September is boring. October is kind of like, okay, now we're building up to November, December, January, February, and then it's just one thing after another as we get into 25. Let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments below, or if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, let me know in the comments below on YouTube. Go over to YouTube, watch this. Like I said before, if you want to know, if you want to get updated with all of the transits that are going to be happening to you and your chart, make sure you check out my astrology transit calendar on my website. It's only $20. It's one of my favorite things that I actually have astrology related, or think about booking a consultation with me if you want to know exactly what this year ahead has in store for you. As well, you could support me over on the Patreon. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'll be having a Mercury retrograde in the Capricorn Sagittarius thing for December of 2023 up here soon, as well as all of the rising sign horoscopes from here on out. So if you want to know what's going to go on with your rising sign specifically, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that video. Like this video. It does really help me out. Comment below that I also appreciate that, and that does help out the channel. Let me know, guys. I'm looking forward to 2024, to be honest with you, given how crazy 2025 is, but I'm going to leave it at that. So I love and appreciate you guys. I'll be seeing you next time.